The battle had been raging for 3 days. Both fleets were exhausted, their ships damaged and their crews pushed to the breaking point. The space around Lumira was filled with debris from destroyed vessels, both human and Krovar. Captain Sunho's ship, the Indomitable, was barely holding together. Half his crew was dead or wounded. His weapons were damaged and his engines were failing, but he kept fighting because that's what humans did. "Sir, the Krovar are changing tactics," Lieutenant Sohi reported. She had taken over as weapons officer after the previous one was killed in a hull breach. "They're targeting the civilian areas on Lumira." Sunho looked at his tactical display with growing horror. The largest Krovar ships were moving away from the battle and heading straight for the planet. Their weapons were charging, preparing to bombard the cities where millions of Villani lived. "They're going to kill everyone down there," Sohi said quietly. Admiral Hune's voice came over the communication channel. "All ships, the Krovar, are targeting civilians. We need to intercept them before they reach bombardment range." But the human fleet was scattered and damaged. Most of the ships were too far away or too badly hurt to catch the Krovar vessels before they started their attack on the planet. Sunho looked at his ship's status. The Indomitable was the closest vessel to the enemy formation, but it was barely functional. His shields were gone, his weapons were operating at 30%, and his engines were ready to fail. "Sir, what are your orders?" Sohi asked. Sunho studied the display for a long moment. There was only one way to stop the Krovar ships before they reached the planet, but it would mean sacrificing his ship and everyone on it. He thought about his crew, good people who had followed him into this battle to help strangers. He thought about his family back on Earth who would never see him again. And he thought about the millions of Villani civilians who would die if he didn't act. "Set ramming course for the lead Krovar ship," he said quietly. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Sohi nodded. "Ramming course set, sir." "All hands, this is the captain," Sunho announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going to ram the enemy flagship. It's been an honor serving with you all. Make sure they remember us." The Indomitable turned toward the massive Krovar vessel and accelerated to maximum speed. The alien ship tried to evade, but it was too large and slow to escape. The impact was spectacular. The human cruiser hit the Krovar ship at full speed, its remaining ammunition exploding on contact. Both vessels were destroyed instantly, taking with them Sunho and most of his crew. But Lieutenant Sohi and a few others survived in the armored section of the ship. They were picked up by rescue ships hours later, wounded but alive. The sacrifice of the Indomitable stopped the bombardment and inspired the rest of the human fleet. But the battle was far from over. Dr. Minji had been working frantically with Villani scientists to develop a weapon that could target the Krovar's biological systems. The breakthrough came when they realized that the alien hive mind, which made them so coordinated, was also their greatest weakness. "Can create a biological virus that attacks their neural network," she explained to Admiral Hyun. "But we need to get it into their command ship." The command ship was the largest Krovar vessel, a monster over 30 kilometers long that seemed to coordinate all the others. It was heavily defended and surrounded by escort ships. "That's a suicide mission," Admiral Hyun said. "I know," Colonel Taemin said over the communication channel. "My Marines and I volunteer." Taemin had been leading boarding actions for the entire battle. His Deathworld Division Marines had proven that they could fight the Krovar in close combat and win. But attacking the command ship would be different. They would be outnumbered 1,000 to 1. "Colonel, I can't ask you to do this." "You're not asking, sir. I'm volunteering. My people knew the risks when we signed up. If this weapon can end the war, then it's worth it." Admiral Hyun was quiet for a moment. He was asking these people to die for aliens they had never met, in a place far from home. But if they didn't try, the Krovar would continue consuming worlds until they reached human space. "Do it," he said. Finally, Colonel Taemin and his Marines loaded the biological weapon onto their assault ships and headed for the Krovar command vessel. They had to fight through waves of enemy fighters and defensive fire to reach the alien ship's hull. Most of the assault ships were destroyed before they could land. Taemin's ship was the only one to make it through, and even it was badly damaged. "We're in," Taemin reported as his Marines blasted their way through the alien hull, beginning infiltration of the command center. The inside of the Krovar ship was like a nightmare. The walls were alive, pulsing with alien life. The air was toxic and the temperature was far above what most species could survive. But the Deathworld Marines pressed forward, their armor protecting them from the hostile environment. They fought through corridors filled with Crovar defenders, using their superior training and equipment to overcome impossible odds. But with each passing minute, more Marines were killed or wounded. "Colonel, we're down to 12 Marines," Sergeant Kiwu reported. "Keep moving," Taman ordered. "We're almost there." They finally reached the command center, a vast chamber filled with biological computers and neural networks. At the center was a massive brain-like structure that seemed to control the entire Crovar fleet. "This is it," Taman said. "Deploy the weapon." Dr. Minji's biological virus was designed to spread through the Crovar neural network like a disease, shutting down their communication and coordination, but it had to be placed directly into the central brain. Taman and his remaining Marines fought their way to the center of the chamber, losing more people with each step. By the time they reached the target, only 3 Marines were left alive. "Sir, the weapon is in place," Sergeant Kiwu said. "Good. Now we get out of here." But as they tried to retreat, Crovar reinforcements blocked their path. The surviving Marines were surrounded with no way to escape. "Colonel, this is Admiral Hune. We're detecting massive power fluctuations in the Crovar ships. Your weapon is working." Taman looked around at his trapped Marines. They were all wounded, and their ammunition was almost gone. But they had completed their mission. "Admiral, tell our families we did our job," he said. The biological weapon spread through the Crovar fleet like wildfire. One by one, the alien ships began to lose coordination and drift in space. Their hive mind was breaking down, leaving them confused and unable to work together. The human fleet pressed their advantage, destroying the disabled Crovar vessels before they could recover. The battle that had seemed hopeless was suddenly turning into a victory, but the cost was enormous. Nearly a quarter of the human fleet had been destroyed, and thousands of sailors and Marines would never return home. The space around Lumira was filled with the wreckage of ships and the bodies of heroes. On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa watched the battle's end with tears in her eyes. The humans had saved her people, but they had paid a terrible price for their victory. "Why?" she asked her advisor. "Why did they sacrifice so much for us?" Her advisor had no answer. The humans had fought and died for people they had never met, asking for nothing in return. It was unlike anything in the Villani's experience. As the last Crovar ships were destroyed, Admiral Hune began the grim task of counting the cost. So many good people were gone, but their sacrifice had saved an entire species and stopped a threat that could have consumed the galaxy. The battle was over, but the real test would come next, learning to live with the price of victory. Space around Lumira suddenly filled with light as over 200 human ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The fleet was massive, stretching across thousands of kilometers. At the center was Admiral Hyun's flagship, the Retribution, a battleship built for war. On Lumira, the Villani watched their screens in amazement. They had never seen so many warships in one place. The human vessels looked nothing like their own elegant crystal ships. These were predators made of metal and weapons designed for one purpose: to destroy their enemies. Prime Speaker Elisa stared at the display showing the human fleet. "Are those all warships?" "Yes, Prime Speaker," her military advisor said, his voice filled with awe. "I count 214 vessels. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers. This is the largest military force I've ever seen." The Crovar had noticed the new arrivals too. Their feeding stopped as the alien ships turned to face this unexpected threat. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Crovar found themselves outnumbered. Admiral Hune stood on the bridge of the Retribution, studying the tactical display. Captain Do-hyun's reconnaissance data had given them a clear picture of what they were facing. "Analysis, Dr. Minji," he said. Dr. Minji looked up from her computer. "The Crovar ships are biological, as expected. They're tough, but they have weak points. Their communication system is based on bioelectrical signals. If we can disrupt that, we can break their coordination." "What about their weapons?" "Plasma-based energy weapons and some kind of acid that can eat through most armor. Their ships can also ram and grab with those tentacles. They're used to fighting at close range." Admiral Hyun nodded. "Then we keep our distance and use our advantage in speed and firepower." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the Crovar ships." The officer worked at his console for a moment. "Channel open, sir." Admiral Hyun's voice carried across space to the alien fleet. He spoke in the Krovar language, which Dr. Minji had pieced together from previous encounters. Krovar vessels, this is Admiral Hyun of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have attacked an innocent species. You have refused to withdraw. We claim right of intervention under galactic law. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. The response came quickly. It wasn't words, but a sound like 1,000 insects screaming in rage. Then the Krovar ships began to move. All 47 of the large vessels and their escort swarms turned toward the human fleet. They moved in a pattern that had worked for them countless times before. A massive charge that would overwhelm their enemies through sheer numbers and size. Here they come, said Captain Sunho, whose ship Indomitable was positioned on the fleet's right flank. All ships, weapons ready. The Krovar attack was impressive and terrifying. Hundreds of ships moving together like a single organism, their dark hulls pulsing with alien life. They had destroyed entire civilizations with this tactic, but humans fought differently than other species. All fighters launch, Admiral Hyun ordered. Begin attack pattern Delta. From the carrier ships came a swarm of small, fast fighters. They moved in ways that seemed impossible, using the gravity of nearby asteroids and the planet itself to change direction suddenly. The lead pilot was Commander Jae-hyun, a young man who flew like he had been born in space. The Krovar had never seen anything like it. Their own fighter craft moved in simple, predictable patterns. But the human fighters twisted and spun, making themselves nearly impossible to hit while striking at weak points on the larger ships. Target their communication nodes, Dr. Minji said over the command channel. Those bioelectrical clusters on the front of each ship. Jae-hyun's fighter group dove toward the largest Krovar vessel, their weapons firing streams of coherent energy. The alien ship's defenses tried to track them, but the humans were too fast and too unpredictable. Direct hit on the command node, Jae-hyun reported. The big one is losing coordination with its escorts. Captain Naeun, commanding the heavy artillery ship Thunder, saw her chance. All batteries target the damaged vessel. Full power. The Thunder and 3 other artillery ships fired together. Their combined firepower hit the wounded Krovar ship like a hammer. The biological vessel writhed in space, its hull cracking and leaking strange fluids, but the Krovar weren't finished. The smaller ships swarmed toward the human fleet, trying to get close enough to use their ramming attacks and acid weapons. Boarding actions, Admiral Hyun said grimly. They're going to try to get inside our ships. Several Krovar vessels managed to attach themselves to human cruisers, their tentacles cutting through the outer hulls. Acid began eating through the metal, creating holes that the aliens could use to send boarding parties. This was where the Deathworld Division showed their worth. Colonel Taman led the Marine response personally. When the first Krovar creatures came through the hull of the cruiser Defiant, they expected to find panicked crew members running for safety. Instead, they found humans in powered armor waiting for them. The fight inside the ship was brutal. The Krovar were tough and deadly, but they had never faced anything like human Marines. These were soldiers trained to fight in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Toxic air, extreme temperatures, crushing gravity. Nothing stopped a Deathworld Marine. Hull breach sealed, Taman reported as his team finished off the last of the boarding party. Ship is secure. Similar battles were happening across the fleet. The Krovar had expected their boarding tactics to create chaos and panic. Instead, they found themselves fighting enemies who seemed to enjoy combat in impossible conditions. The tide of battle began to turn. The human fighters continued to hit and run, disrupting Krovar coordination. The artillery ships pounded the larger vessels from long range, and whenever the aliens tried to board, they met the Marines of the Deathworld Division. But the Krovar still had one advantage: sheer size. Their largest ships were mobile fortresses that could absorb enormous amounts of damage. As the battle continued, it became clear that this would be a long, costly fight. Captain Sunho's Indomitable was taking heavy fire from 3 Krovar ships that had surrounded it. His shields were failing and his hull was starting to buckle under the assault. "Sir, we need to withdraw," his weapons officer said. Sunho looked at his tactical display. If his ship retreated, it would leave a gap in the formation that the Krovar could exploit. Other ships would be destroyed. Negative. Continue firing. All weapons target the ship on our starboard side. Sir, our shields are down to 15%. Then we better make our shots count. The Indomitable poured all its remaining power into its weapons, hitting the Crovar ship again and again. The alien vessel finally began to break apart, its biological hull unable to take any more damage. But the victory came at a cost. The other two Crovar ships concentrated their fire on Sunho's ship, and the cruiser's shields finally failed completely. On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa watched the battle in amazement and horror. She had never seen anything like it. The humans fought with a skill and ferocity that seemed impossible, but they were also taking terrible losses. "Why are they doing this?" she asked. "Why are they dying for us?" Her military advisor had no answer. The concept of risking everything for strangers was beyond his understanding. In space, the battle continued to rage. The Crovar were learning that these Deathworlders were unlike any enemy they had ever faced. But they were also discovering that humans, when pushed to their limits, could be just as terrifying as the monsters they fought. Captain Do-hyun's ship, the Shadowrunner, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Lumira system. The stealth vessel immediately activated its invisibility systems, becoming nothing more than a ghost in space. "What do you see?" Do-hyun asked his sensor operator, Lieutenant Yuna. Yuna's fingers moved across her console as she gathered data. Her face grew pale as the information appeared on her screens. "Sir, this is worse than we thought." The main display showed the Lumira system. It should have been beautiful, with a bright star and several planets orbiting around it. Instead, it looked like a wound in space. Two of the system's outer planets were gone. Completely gone. Where they used to be, there were only clouds of debris and strange dark matter that seemed to eat light. "The Crovar ships are feeding," Yuna said quietly. "They're literally consuming the planets." Do-hyun studied the display. He had seen many horrible things in his years as a scout, but this was different. This wasn't war. This was extermination. "How many ships?" "I count 47 large vessels and maybe 200 smaller ones." "The big ships are—" She paused, checking her readings. "Sir, the largest one is over 30 kilometers long." 30 kilometers? Do-hyun had never seen a ship that big. Human battleships were considered huge at 2 kilometers. "And sir, they're not metal. The ships are biological. They're alive." The Crovar fleet looked like a swarm of giant insects feeding on a carcass. The smaller ships moved around the larger ones in complex patterns, while the big ships extended massive tentacles to collect the debris from the destroyed planets. "What about the Volani?" Yuna adjusted her sensors to focus on the inner system. "They're still fighting. I can see their defense platforms firing, but their weapons are barely scratching the Crovar ships." On the display, tiny flashes of light marked where Volani weapons hit the dark alien vessels. It was like watching someone try to fight a forest fire with a water gun. "The Volani ships are beautiful," Yuna said softly. She was right. The Volani vessels looked like works of art. They were made of some kind of crystal that caught and reflected light. Even in the middle of a hopeless battle, they were graceful and elegant. "How long before the Crovar reached the main planet?" Do-hyun asked. "At their current speed, maybe 18 hours. Do-hyun made a decision. "Open a communication channel to the Volani." "Sir, that will blow our cover. The Crovar will see us." "Do it anyway." Lieutenant Yuna hesitated for a moment, then activated the communication system. "Channel open, sir." Do-hyun cleared his throat. He had practiced this moment during the trip, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Do-hyun of the Terran ship Shadowrunner. Please respond." For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was musical and strange, but the universal translator made the words clear. "Who are you? Are you here to help or harvest?" The question hit Do-hyun like a punch. These people were so desperate that they had to ask if new arrivals were friends or just more enemies. "We're here to help," he said. "We received your distress signal. We're coming to aid you." There was a longer pause this time. Then the voice came back, filled with something that might have been hope. "You heard our call? You came because we asked for help?" "Yes, my people are on their way. A large fleet with many ships." "Your people? What species are you?" "We have never heard of Terrans." Do-hyun realized that the Volani had probably never encountered humans before. Most alien species knew about Earth, even if they didn't visit. But the Volani lived at the edge of the galaxy, far from the trade routes. "We're from a planet called Earth. We call ourselves humans, and we don't like bullies." On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa listened to the strange voice with growing amazement. Someone had actually come. After all the prayers and desperate signals, someone had heard them. "How many ships do you have?" she asked. "I'm just a scout," the human captain said. but the main fleet has over 200 vessels. They'll be here soon. Elisa felt hope for the first time in days. 200 ships sounded like a lot. Do you understand what you're facing? She asked. The Krovar have destroyed entire civilizations. They've been consuming worlds for thousands of years. We understand, the human said. That's why we're going to stop them. There was something in his voice that Elisa had never heard before. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was anger. Cold, controlled anger. On the Shadowrunner, alarms suddenly started blaring. Sir, the Krovar have detected us, Yuna said. Multiple ships are heading our way. Do-hyun could see them on the display. A dozen of the smaller Krovar vessels had broken away from the main group and were moving toward their position. Even the small ones were huge compared to his ship. How fast can those things move? He asked. Faster than I expected. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Do-hyun opened the channel to the Vellani again. We have to go. The Krovar are coming for us. But remember, you're not alone anymore. Help is coming. Wait, the Vellani voice said. What should we tell our people? What should we call you? Do-hyun thought for a moment. Tell them the Deathworlders are coming. Deathworlders? It's what other species call us. We come from a dangerous planet, so they think we're all a little crazy. They're probably right. The communication cut off as the Shadowrunner activated its emergency engines. The ship accelerated away from the approaching Krovar vessels, using its superior speed to escape. But not before Lieutenant Yuna completed a full sensor scan of the alien ships. I've got detailed readings on their hull composition, weapon systems, and biological structure, she said. This data should help the main fleet when they arrive. Good. Set course for the fleet rendezvous point. Maximum speed. As the Shadowrunner jumped back into hyperspace, the Krovar ships that had been chasing them stopped and returned to their feeding. They had dealt with scouts before. Most species sent a few ships to investigate, then fled when they saw the size of the Krovar force. They expected these humans to do the same thing. On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa called an emergency meeting of the council. The crystal chamber filled with Vellani leaders all talking at once about the strange contact. Deathworlders? Said one council member. What does that mean? I don't know, Elisa said. But they said they were coming to help us. 200 ships sounds like a lot, said another member. But the Krovar have destroyed species with much larger fleets. Elisa looked out at the stars, where the dark shapes of Krovar ships continued their terrible work. Maybe these humans are different. Different how? I don't know. But did you hear his voice when he talked about the Krovar? He wasn't afraid. He was angry. The council members looked at each other uncertainly. They were peaceful people who solved problems through discussion and compromise. The idea of someone being angry about strangers being hurt was foreign to them. But as the Krovar ships moved closer to their world, they found themselves hoping that these mysterious Deathworlders were as dangerous as their name suggested. Admiral Hyun stood in the middle of the Fleet Command Center, surrounded by screens showing ship positions across human space. The room buzzed with activity as officers worked at their stations. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Show me what we know, he said to Dr. Minji, the head of alien studies. Dr. Minji touched her tablet and the main screen filled with images. The Vellani are a peaceful species. They've been exploring space for about 3,000 years, but they've never fought a major war. Their technology is advanced, but it's built for trade and exploration, not combat. Captain Sunho leaned forward in his chair. He was younger than the Admiral, with dark eyes that always seemed ready for a fight. What about these Krovar things? The screen changed to show dark, twisted shapes that barely looked like ships. This is where it gets scary, Dr. Minji said. The Krovar aren't just conquerors. They're biological. Their ships are grown, not built. They consume everything on a planet, then move to the next one. Admiral Gina, a stern woman with short gray hair, spoke up. We have reports from our outer colonies. 3 settlements have gone missing in the past year. No survivors, no wreckage. Just empty space where planets used to be. You think it was the Krovar? Admiral Hyun asked. The timeline matches. They move slowly but steadily through space, eating everything in their path. Captain Sunho stood up and walked to the screen. So we stopped them. It's not that simple, Admiral Gina said. We don't know how many ships they have. We don't know their capabilities. And the Vellani are 200 light years away. By the time we get there, they might already be dead. Then we better move fast, Sunho said. Admiral Hyun looked at the faces around the room. These were good people, experienced officers who had kept humanity safe for decades. But this was different. This wasn't about protecting human colonies. This was about helping complete strangers. "Sir," said Captain Do-Yun, who had been quiet until now, "let me take my scout ship and get a closer look. The Shadowrunner can get there faster than the main fleet. I can gather intelligence and assess the situation." Do-Yun was the youngest captain in the room, but his stealth ship had completed more dangerous missions than anyone wanted to count. If anyone could get in and out unseen, it was him. "Good idea," the Admiral said. "But don't engage. Just watch and report, and what about the rest of us?" Sunho asked. Admiral Hyun was quiet for a moment. He looked at the star chart showing the location of the Volani system. It was far away at the edge of known space. Getting there would require most of their fleet, leaving human space less defended. But the signal was still playing in his mind. The fear and desperation in that mathematical cry for help. "We're going to help them," he said finally. Admiral Gina frowned. "Sir, with respect, that's a huge risk. We could lose half the fleet fighting an unknown enemy to save aliens we've never met." "She's right," said another officer. "Our job is to protect humanity." Admiral Hyun turned to face them all. "Our job is to do what's right. These Krovar things are moving toward human space. If we don't stop them now, we'll have to fight them later when they're stronger and hungrier." He paused and looked at the alien signal data on the screen. "Besides, when someone asks for help, you help. That's what makes us human." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Captain Sunho smiled. "How big a fleet are we talking about?" "Everything we can spare. Battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers. The whole Deathworld division." Dr. Minji looked surprised. "The Deathworld division? Isn't that a bit much?" The Deathworld division was humanity's most elite fighting force. They were Marines trained to fight in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Other species thought humans were crazy for living on a planet with weather, earthquakes, and dangerous animals. The Deathworld division took that craziness and turned it into a weapon. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," Admiral Hyun said. "Minho, send a message to all fleet commands. I want every available ship ready to move in 24 hours. The young communications officer nodded and started typing rapidly. "What about supplies?" Admiral Gina asked. She might not like the plan, but she was professional enough to help make it work. "Strip everything we can from the home defense fleet. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. If we're going to war, we need to be ready for a long fight." Captain Sunho was already studying the star charts. "The Krovar will see us coming. Ships that size can't hide." "Let them see us," Admiral Hyun said. "Maybe it will make them think twice." Dr. Minji pulled up more data on her tablet. "I've been analyzing their biological structure based on the outer colony reports. They seem to have some kind of hive mind. If we can disrupt their communication, we might be able to confuse them. Work on that. If we can give ourselves any advantage, we need it." Across human space, Admiral Hyun's orders were creating chaos. Ships that had been on routine patrol suddenly received orders to report to the main fleet base. Crews that had been enjoying shore leave were called back to duty. Supply ships worked around the clock to load ammunition and provisions. Captain Do-Hyun's stealth ship, the Shadowrunner, was the first to leave. It was a small, fast vessel designed to be invisible to most sensors. As it jumped into hyperspace, heading for the Volani system, Do-Hyun's crew prepared for what might be the most important reconnaissance mission in human history. On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa watched the stars and waited for death. The Krovar ships had appeared at the edge of their system, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her people were evacuating the outer settlements, but there was nowhere to run. The Krovar ships were faster than anything the Volani had. The emergency signal was still broadcasting, but it was getting weaker. "The power cells were almost empty. Any responses?" she asked her communications officer. "Nothing, Prime Speaker. A few automated replies from trade stations, but no one is coming." Elisa nodded sadly. She had not really expected help. The galaxy was a harsh place, and most species looked after themselves first. But somewhere in space, a human fleet was gathering. Admiral Hyun's ships were loading supplies and checking weapons. Marines were saying goodbye to their families. Engineers were running final diagnostics on engines and shields. In a few hours, the largest human fleet ever assembled would leave for a distant star system to help people they had never met fight an enemy they barely understood. Because sometimes, Admiral Hyun thought as he watched the preparations, being human meant doing the right thing even when it was stupid. The Krovar ships moved closer to Lumira. their dark hulls pulsing with alien life. They had consumed dozens of worlds, and they expected this one to be just as easy. They had never met humans before. The crystal towers of Lumira shone like diamonds against the purple sky. For thousands of years, the Villani had lived in peace on their beautiful world. Their cities floated above the clouds, connected by bridges of light. They had never known war. They had never needed to. But today, everything changed. Prime Speaker Elisa stood in the central tower, looking at the screens that showed nothing but darkness where their neighbor planets used to be. 3 star systems had gone silent in the past month. No signals, no light, nothing. "The Krovar are coming," said her advisor, his blue skin pale with fear. The scouts confirmed it. They destroyed everything in the Zilani system. Every planet, every moon, every living thing. Elisa closed her eyes. She had hoped the reports were wrong. The Krovar were stories told to frighten children, ancient tales of creatures that ate worlds and turned peaceful beings into slaves. But the stories were real. "How long do we have?" she asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Their ships are massive. They move slowly, but they never stop. The Villani had beautiful ships, but they were made for exploration and trade. Their weapons were designed to clear asteroids, not fight wars. They had tried to call their allies in the nearby systems, but most had already fled or were fighting their own battles. "Send the old signal," Elisa said quietly. "The what?" "The ancient emergency call. The one our ancestors used when they first traveled the stars. Send it on all frequencies. Send it everywhere." Her advisor looked confused. "But Prime Speaker, no one has used that signal for hundreds of years. Most species don't even remember what it means." "Send it anyway," Elisa said. "Someone out there might hear us. Someone might care." The signal went out across the galaxy. It was a simple message repeated over and over in mathematical patterns that any intelligent species could understand. It said, "Help us. We are dying. Please help us." Most aliens who heard it ignored the message. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and getting involved in other people's wars usually meant dying. Some species were too far away to help. Others were too scared of the Krovar to try. But the signal traveled through space, bouncing off relay stations and communication satellites. It passed through busy trade routes and empty space. It reached the edge of known space and kept going. On Earth Station 7, located far from the home planet, Communications Officer Minho was working the night shift. He was tired and bored. Most nights, he just listened to trader chatter and routine military reports. Nothing exciting ever happened on the night shift. Then his computer started beeping. Minho looked at his screen and frowned. There was a signal coming from the far edge of the galaxy. It was weak, but it was definitely artificial. Someone was broadcasting something. He adjusted his equipment and listened carefully. The signal was strange. It used old mathematical patterns that he recognized from his training, but he had never heard them used this way. The message was simple, but there was something else in it. Something that made his chest feel tight. Fear, desperation, hope. "Computer, analyze signal pattern," he said. The computer's voice was calm and mechanical. "Signal uses ancient emergency protocols. Mathematical structure indicates high intelligence. Emotional patterns suggest extreme distress." Minho listened to the signal again. Whoever was sending this was smart, scared, and running out of time. They were asking for help from anyone who would listen. He looked at the regulations manual. Standard procedure was to log the signal and file a report in the morning, but something about this message made him feel like morning might be too late. "Computer, connect me to Admiral Hyun." "Sir, it is 0300 hours. The Admiral is off duty. This is an emergency. Connect me now." A few minutes later, Admiral Hyun's tired face appeared on the screen. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Even half asleep, he looked alert. "This better be important, Minho." "Sir, I've received a distress signal from an unknown species. They're using ancient emergency protocols. I think they're in serious trouble." The Admiral rubbed his eyes. "Play it." Minho sent the signal to the Admiral's personal computer. He watched the older man's face change as he listened. The tiredness disappeared, replaced by something harder. "How far away?" the Admiral asked. "Best guess about 200 light-years. Edge of the galaxy." "Any other responses to this signal?" "None that I can detect, sir." Admiral Hyun was quiet for a long moment. Minho could see him thinking, weighing options. Finally, he spoke. "Send me everything you have on this signal. Run a full analysis. I want to know who sent it, where they are, and what kind of trouble they're in." "Sir, are we going to help them?" The Admiral looked at him seriously. Son, when someone sends a signal like that, you don't ignore it. Get me that information. I need to make some calls. The screen went dark, leaving Minho alone with the ongoing signal. He worked through the rest of the night, gathering every bit of information he could find. The signal was getting weaker, which meant the transmitter was probably running out of power. By morning, he had located the source. A planet called Lumira in a system at the very edge of explored space. The inhabitants called themselves Villani. They had been peaceful traders and explorers for thousands of years. Something called the Crovar was attacking them. Minho had never heard of the Crovar, but his computer search found some disturbing reports from the outer colonies. Ships that went missing. Planets that stopped communicating. Stories of creatures that turned entire worlds into feeding grounds. Most people thought the Crovar were myths. Looking at the data, Minho was starting to think they were very real. His computer beeped again. A new message, this time from Admiral Hyun's office. Report to Fleet Command immediately. Bring all data on the alien signal. Minho gathered his files and headed for the shuttle bay. As he traveled toward the main fleet base, he could see ships moving in space around him. More ships than usual. Something big was happening. The Villani signal continued to broadcast across the galaxy, growing weaker with each passing hour. On Lumira, Prime Speaker Elisa stood in her crystal tower, watching the empty space where her neighboring worlds used to be. Soon, she knew, that emptiness would reach them too. But somewhere in the darkness of space, humanity had heard their call for help. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, had very strong opinions about bullies who picked on peaceful species.